Chapter 2, The Biennial Beet. At first, Ellen thought everything about the third grade was going to be perfect. The nicest part of all was knowing Austine. She thought they were best friends, but she wasn't quite sure. Austine hadn't said anything about being best friends, but the two girls were always together at dancing class and at school, and they liked to play at each other's houses. Austine liked to play at Ellen's house because the attic was full of such interesting things. Old clothes for dressing up, a violin with half the strings missing, piles of magazines full of coupons to send away for free samples. The basement was an interesting place too, and the girls spent one rainy afternoon there blowing bubbles in a bucket of soap suds with an old tire pump. Austine had never lived in a house with a basement or an attic before she moved to Oregon. Anyway, her mother believed in sending old things to the Goodwill instead of keeping them in case they might come in handy someday. The rest of Ellen's house was nice too, but in a different way. The furniture was polished, the floors shone, and everything was in perfect order. Austine always felt she should be on her very best behavior, so she wouldn't leave marks on the floor or knock over a vase. Mrs. Tebbits used her nicest dishes for serving cookies and tea made with lots of milk. That made Austine feel grown up. Ellen liked to go to Austine's home because it was next door to the house with the gnomes on the lawn, and because although there was nothing in the Allen's attic but empty trucks and packing cases, the rest of the house was such a nice place to play. The furniture was old and comfortable, and there was nothing that could be easily broken. Best of all, Austine's mother did not mind the girls making brownies in her kitchen. If they spilled cookie batter on the floor, she never said, "Oh dear, my clean floor." Instead, she found a cloth for wiping up the batter. Ellen thought this was a nice way for a mother to be. Next to having Austine for a friend, Ellen felt that the next best thing about third grade was having Miss Joyce for her teacher. Miss Joyce was the nicest teacher in Rosemont School. She was never impatient and almost never cross. Besides, she was young and pretty and had curly hair. Unlike other teachers, Miss Joyce never wore dark blouses and skirts or sensible shoes. She wore the prettiest clothes Ellen had ever seen. Ellen liked best of all a yellow woolen dress that made her think of sunshine on rainy winter days. With the yellow dress, Miss Joyce always wore beautiful red shoes and high heels. "Red and yellow, catch a fellow," Otis whispered whenever Miss Joyce wore the dress. But Ellen made up her mind that when she was grown up, she was going to have a yellow dress and a pair of red shoes with teetery heels, just like her teachers. But as much as Ellen loved Miss Joyce, she was not quite happy in Miss Joyce's room. Of course, Miss Joyce was always very nice to Ellen. She was patient with her mistakes in arithmetic and praising her reading, even when she mispronounced words. She always noticed when Ellen wore a new dress to school and told her how pretty she thought it was. Just the same, as the days went by, Ellen became more and more certain that Miss Joyce did not like her as much as she liked the other boys and girls. Ellen was sure of this because Miss Joyce never asked her to clap erasers. Every day, just before afternoon recess, Miss Joyce named 2 children to collect all the blackboard erasers, take them outdoors, and beat the chalk dust out of them. Every day when it came time for Miss Joyce to select the children, Ellen was hopeful, but Miss Joyce always chose someone else. When the boys and girls went out for recess, Ellen would wait her turn at hopscotch and wistfully watch the lucky pair as they clapped erasers together and made chalk dust fly. If the erasers were extra dirty, they would make faces and turn their heads away as they beat out the dust. Sometimes they beat the erasers against the brick building. Ellen wanted more than anything to make chalk dust fly and to beat a white pattern on the red building. Finally, in November, when Austine had clapped erasers twice and Otis had clapped them 3 times, Ellen said to Austine, "If Miss Joyce really liked me, I just know she would choose me to clap erasers." "It's funny she's never picked you," agreed Austine. "But she sent you to the principal's office with notes, and she never lets me go." Ellen liked to be sent to the principal's office with notes. She liked having the long halls all to herself with no hall monitors around to keep her from running and leaping. She did this very quietly on her toes, pretending she was a ballerina. It was fun, but it wasn't the same as clapping erasers. Finally, Ellen made up her mind that she would have to do something special to please Miss Joyce. She didn't know what it would be, but would have to be something Miss Joyce couldn't help noticing. One day, Miss Joyce sent the class to the board to review arithmetic problems. Ellen dreaded doing addition where everyone could see her because she was so poor in arithmetic. At her desk, she could at least put her hands in her lap and count quickly on her fingers. She took her place on the blackboard. Otis took the space beside her. He picked up a long piece of chalk and squeaked it on the blackboard. Ellen put her hands over her ears. "Otis, you are not cooperating," said Miss Joyce. "All right, class. We will start with an easy problem. Write these numbers in a column. 9, 4, 7. Oh dear, thought Ellen. 7s and 9s were always hard. She drew her numbers slowly and very carefully to give herself time to think. Otis scribbled his figures, drew a long line under them, and wrote the total while Ellen was drawing a neat plus sign. She didn't mean to look at Otis's work, but somehow she could not help turning her eyes toward it. "Hey, you're peeking," said Otis in a loud whisper. "I am not," said Ellen, and quickly wrote her total, even though she knew it was wrong. She wrote 137. Miss Joyce looked around the room. Everyone look at Ellen's work, please," she said. "Ellen has made a mistake that is very easy to make if we are not thinking. Ellen has added 9 and 4 correctly. That gave her 13. Then instead of adding 7 to 13, she put the 7 at the end of 13. That gave her 137 instead of the correct answer. Who can give me the correct answer?" 20, said Linda loudly, and looked triumphant at Ellen. Linda always seemed to be right when Ellen was wrong. "That's right, Linda. I am sure Ellen knew better. She just wasn't thinking." Miss Joyce smiled reassuringly, but Ellen didn't feel any better. She would never get to clap erasers by making silly mistakes in arithmetic. "All right, boys and girls, erase your work." Everyone grabbed for an eraser. There were never enough erasers to go around, but for once Ellen managed to snatch one. So did Otis. "Miss Joyce," said Linda from the front of the blackboard, "we have only 2 erasers here, and they have more than their share on the sideboard." "Who will be kind and give an eraser to the front blackboard?" asked Miss Joyce. Ellen disliked giving up her eraser, especially since it would mean sharing one with Otis. It wasn't often that she had an eraser all to herself, but to please Miss Joyce, she took her eraser to the front blackboard and handed it to Linda. "Thank you, Ellen. You are a good neighbor." Miss Joyce smiled at Ellen. "Ready for the next problem?" Ellen hoped she had pleased Miss Joyce enough to be chosen to clap erasers, but when recess came, Miss Joyce selected George and Linda. Ellen was terribly disappointed. Surely there must be something she could do to please Miss Joyce. "Why don't you bring something to school?" suggested Austine sympathetically. "Then maybe Miss Joyce would choose you." Ellen thought this was a good idea. All the boys and girls in Ellen's room liked to bring things to school to show the class. The next morning, Ellen brought an autumn leaf that she thought was unusually pretty. Joanne brought a larger and more colorful leaf, so no one paid much attention to Ellen's leaf. A few days later, Miss Joyce was reading a chapter about plants out of Science Reader, Book 3. She explained that many plants lived only one season. These plants were called annuals. The class could think of lots of annuals they had seen. They named petunias, pansies, zinnias, and many others. Then Mrs. Joyce explained that perennials were plants that grew year after year. Amelia said that the roses and pinks growing in her yard were perennial, because they had been there as long as she could remember. Austine waved her hand and said that geraniums were perennials. "They are not," said Linda, without even raising her hand. "They don't count because they grow in pots." "They do not. In California," Austine glanced at Ellen and continued, "where I used to live, they grow for years and years. They grew in our yard, and they were higher than the fence." Miss Joyce smiled. Austine is right, Linda. Geraniums are perennials, even though we cannot grow them outdoors in winter in Oregon." Miss Joyce went on to explain that biennials were plants that took 2 years to grow and produce seeds. The class thought and thought, but no one could think of even one biennial. Finally, Miss Joyce said, I can think of two very common biennials, beets and carrots. You probably have never seen a beet or a carrot that has grown a flower and seeds, because we eat them before they are that old. Then Ellen remembered the beet she had seen in the vacant lot several blocks from her house. It had been growing for months in a lot where someone had once had a vegetable garden. Ellen always looked for the beet when she went down the street, because it was the biggest beet she had ever seen. The last time she had looked, the stalk growing out of it was over 2 feet high. Now that she thought about it, the stalk did have a funny thing at the top. She supposed it was the beet flower, but it certainly wasn't very pretty. Ellen raised her hand. I know where there is a beet with a flower on top. If you want, I could bring it to school to show the class. Thank you, Ellen, said Miss Joyce. I think that is an excellent idea. We do not often see a beet blossom. If the weather is unusually cold, the plants must be dug up and buried in pits, and then replanted in the spring. However, we had such a mild winter last year that perhaps it wasn't necessary. Ellen smiled happily. At last she had thought of something that would please Miss Joyce. Surely she would get to clap erasers if she brought a rare biennial beet flower to school. Early the next morning, Ellen ran up on Austine's porch, out of the rain and in her rubber boots, tap dance. Hop, 1, 2, 3. This was the way the girls summoned each other. Instead of calling or ringing the doorbell, she waited and danced again. Hop, 1, 2, 3. Slap down, slap down. Austine's brother Bruce came to the door. Austine isn't ready, he said. Then Austine came to the door in her stocking feet with her hair uncombed. Oh, Austine, couldn't you have been ready on time for once in your life? Ellen asked. I've just got to get that beet so Miss Joyce will like me. I tried to be early, replied Austine. I can't help it if I broke both shoelaces and had to look all over for a pair of socks that matched. Ellen sighed. Well, I guess I'll see you at school then. I've got to hurry if I'm going to get over to the lot and pull that beet. It was 3 blocks to the vacant lot. Running made Ellen so warm that she unbuttoned her raincoat, even though the rain was falling faster every minute. It was hard to run in her rubber boots because they made her feet so heavy, and she had to hold the hood of her raincoat in place, or the wind blew it off. As she ran, she began to be afraid the beet might be gone when she got there. It was such a big beet, someone might have pulled it up and eaten it. But when Ellen climbed up the bank of the vacant lot, the beet was still there. It was growing on the edge of the lot, next to the white house. With her boots squishing in the mud, Ellen walked through the weeds. The beet was even larger than she realized. The stalk was at least 3 feet high. She took hold of the stem near the ground and tugged. Nothing happened. She examined the lower part of the stalk and saw that it was growing out of an immense beet. Part of it showed above the ground. Ellen found a stick and scraped away some of the dirt. She grasped the stalk and pulled again. The beet did not budge. Ellen did not know what time it was, but she knew she must hurry. She found a bigger stick and dug away some more dirt from the vegetable. She pulled again. The beet did not move. Ellen was getting desperate. She decided to use her hands. They were already dirty from the beet stalk anyway, so she might as well get them dirtier. She would be very, very careful not to touch her dress. She squatted and began to claw the dirt away from the beet. The soil was cold and heavy. It stuck to her fingers. When she had uncovered half the beet, she saw that it was nearly 6 inches across. That's an impressive size for a beet. Once more, she grabbed the stalk and pulled, bracing her feet. The beet began to come slowly out of the ground. Just then, a window in the house next door flew open and a woman's voice called through the rain, "What are you doing, little girl?" Ellen started. The long, thin taproot broke, and Ellen sat down in the mud with a thump. She had the beet in her hands. "Pulling a beet," answered Ellen guiltily. It had not occurred to her that the beet might have an owner. She thought things growing in vacant lots belonged to everybody. Sitting on the ground in the pouring rain and holding the precious vegetable, she asked timidly, "Is it your beet?" "Yes, it is," said the woman crossly. "What do you want it for?" "I want to take it to school to show the class how beet seeds grow," said Ellen politely. "But if it is your beet, you may have it. I didn't know it belonged to you." "No, I don't want it," snapped the woman. "It's too old and tough to eat. Take it, but after this, don't go pulling up things up on other people's property." She slammed the window. Yeesh. Ellen felt bad because she would not have touched the plant if she had thought it belonged to anyone. Holding the beet carefully so she wouldn't knock off any of the blossoms, she got up from the wet ground, twisted around to look at herself. The backs of her legs were muddy. Her raincoat, which she was outgrowing, was covered with mud. So was the bottom of her dress, hanging below the raincoat. She found it useless to try to wipe off the mud because her hands were even muddier than her clothes. Maybe she could wipe it off at school, or maybe the rain could wash it off. She didn't have any time to waste. It was not until Ellen was back on the sidewalk that she noticed how the broken beetroot had smeared juice all over the front of her freshly starched dress. Her pretty green one with the yellow flowers printed on it. The red juice stood out in ugly contrast. "Oh dear," she thought, "what if it doesn't wash out? What will Mother say?" Ellen had never been tardy in her life. Now she ran as fast as she could through the downpour in her heavy boots. Even though her starched dress wilted, she could not take time to put down her beet and button her raincoat. Her hood blew back as soon as she pulled it into place. She tried to hold the dirty vegetable away from her clothes, but that made running more difficult. Finally, she decided she was already so dirty that more dirt couldn't make any difference. She clutched the beet against herself with both hands and ran faster, her boots clumping on the sidewalk and her raincoat flying out behind her. When her hood blew off again, she gave up trying to keep it in place. Her hair whipped around her face in wet strings. She was still several blocks from school when she heard the first bell. "I'll never make it," she thought. "I'll be tardy, and Miss Joyce won't like it. I've just got to run faster." "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Ellen heard someone call. Without stopping, she looked around and saw Bruce, Austine's big brother, riding his bicycle along the curb beside her. "To school," she gasped. "What are you doing with that beet?" "Miss Joyce wants me to bring it." Ellen slowed down. She was so out of breath she couldn't run another step. "I guess I'm going to be tardy." Bruce looked disgusted. "Oh, come on," he said. "I'll give you a lift. You can sit in the basket." "Would you?" asked Ellen gratefully. "Sure. Here, let me hold on to your beet while you climb up. Be careful. Don't break the stalk." Ellen stepped up on the front tire of the bicycle and scrambled into the basket. It was not very comfortable, and her feet stuck out awkwardly. Bruce handed her the beet and began to pedal. Ellen found it exciting to ride in the basket with the rain in her face. While Bruce steered the bicycle by turning the handlebars, he steered Ellen too. Ellen hoped it wouldn't tip over. She held her beet in one hand and grabbed the edge of the basket with the other. Wet and dirty though she was, Ellen was secretly pleased. None of the other girls ever rode to school in a bicycle basket of an 8th grade boy. Ellen was glad he was wearing his Boy Scout uniform under his raincoat. He looked so handsome in his uniform. They reached Rosemont School just as the last boys and girls were straggling into the building. "Look at Ellen!" shouted Linda. A group of girls from Miss Joyce's room paused to watch. Bruce held the beet while Ellen climbed down out of the basket. As she jumped from the bicycle, the hem of her dress caught on the wire basket and tore. "Oh my," said Ellen, as she looked at the tear. It was such a pretty dress, and now it was spoiled. What would her mother say? "Here, take your old beet," said Bruce, who did not enjoy having a lot of 3rd grade girls staring at him. "I haven't got all day." "Thanks a lot, Bruce," said Ellen shyly. "Oh, that's all right. Now I've done my good deed for the day," said Bruce, and pedaled off to the bicycle racks. "Brother, you a mess," yelled Otis cheerfully when he saw Ellen. "When Miss Joyce sees you, I bet she sends you home." Such a thought had not occurred to Ellen. "She will not send me home," she answered, but her voice quavered. Otis was probably right. She was so wet and muddy, Miss Joyce would send her home to change her clothes. Then she would not get to show her beet to the class and would never get to clap erasers. Otis, who never cared about being tardy, splashed through the rain to Ellen. "You tore your dress," he announced. "I know it," said Ellen crossly. Otis began to chant loudly. I see London, I see France, I see somebody's under. Ellen clutched her raincoat around her and shouted, Otis Spofford, you be quiet. Then she burst into tears. I see London, I see France, I see somebody's... Otis Spofford, you shut up this very instant. It was Austine. She ran splashing through the puddles. Come on, Ellen, she said, taking her by the arm. I'll help you get cleaned up. But it's time for the second bell, said Ellen, as she tried to wipe her eyes with the back of her one muddy hand. You'll be tardy. No, I won't, said Austine. When I saw you might be late, I asked Miss Joyce if I could go help you get the beet, and she said I could. Come on. I see London, I see France, sang Otis. I see... Otis Spofford, you mind your own business, snapped Austine. Ellen is my best friend, and I won't have you picking on her. Wow. I think that proves it that Ellen and Austine are best friends. And they actually got the beet. That's impressive. Please join me for Chapter 3.